All right, on the line, Chuck Klosterman, BS Podcast Hall of Famer. He has a new book out that is called Raised in Captivity. He's been on tour. He was at Gillette last week. He played the Meadowlands. He played Dodger Stadium. I know it was an incredible tour. I know everybody turned out. What is it like to do a book tour in 2019, the selfie, get a picture with a celebrity era?
Well, the pictures are part of it now. When I was in Austin, almost every person who got a book signed also wanted a picture. I guess it's just so easy. That slows it down a little bit, I guess. I don't mind. I don't know what people are doing with all these pictures, but they can have them. The events themselves, though, I think they're more the same than different. It's just that the economics of selling books has changed so much that it's just a weird idea now. I mean, it's like you're going on, when I go on tour, it's a strange situation because, so I'm selling books, obviously, ostensibly, that's the idea. But the people who come to a reading, well, they're probably the people who would definitely buy a book anyway, right?
You would think.
If someone's willing to come to a bookstore and sit there and listen to a guy talk and read or whatever, that person was probably going to buy the book anyways. So I'm not exactly sure how it makes economic sense to do it. I mean, the tours are smaller. I'm only doing 9 cities this year. Yeah. I guess in the past, like when I did Killing Yourself to Live, I think I had a 6-week tour. I don't think anyone does that anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think it's funny. I did a book tour in 2005 and I did a book tour in 2009.
But you don't read, right? That's your thing. You do not read ever.
I didn't really know what I was doing, and I didn't do that many, and we had enough people there that I probably should have read, but it was more like I just wanted to meet people and sign books. And at that point, especially in 2005, you had no connection to people other than they read my column, right? I didn't even have a podcast at that point. And 2009, I had Twitter for maybe 6 months at that point. I'd probably had, I don't know, 35,000 followers or something. But I wasn't in somebody's life the way that really anybody can be now. Like nowadays, people are able to be connected to you, even if it's in that weird digital way where they're following me on Twitter and or on Instagram, and they're listening to this podcast. However else, I'm kind of in their life more. Back then in 2005, it was like, it's my column and that's it. If you wanted to even see what I looked like or hear my voice, this was the one chance. So I do think the dynamic. Well, I think social media has shifted it.
I don't do that stuff though. I'm not really on Twitter for that. I only kind of promote things. So I'm more like the band Tool. If you want to see me, you got to go to this thing.
But they can hear you in this podcast, though. They have a feel for what you're like on different podcasts and things like that. So that's different.
And you know what, Bill? This is something, I don't know if I've ever told you this before. Maybe we talked about this, but having gone on this podcast for all these years, I'm sure has helped me sell more books. I'm sure it has helped my career, And yet I do wonder, ultimately, was it a mistake? Would I have been better off? I'm serious. I did all that TV stuff and all these podcast things. I was in that movie and all. So now everyone knows how I sound, right?
Yeah.
Well, when you write a book, and if the idea, if you're lucky, and people feel like your writing has voice, but they don't know what your voice is, the voice they create is the best version of their own voice. So the voice they hear in their head is the best version of themselves. But once you know what a person talks like, that's the voice you hear. And frankly, there's a lot of people who hate my voice. I know that's the case. And I'm sure that has been detrimental to me over time. It's can you imagine reading a Malcolm Gladwell book now and not hearing Malcolm Gladwell's voice? It can't be done. And so I do wonder sometimes if I had never done anything in public except book readings, if it would be more, if it would have been to the benefit of the actual book, even though I would have sold way less of them.
Or if you just did nothing, you were just this enigma that just produced this book Unabomber style every year and nobody even knew where you lived or what you looked like.
Well, that's kind of like what William Vollmann does. I mean, he's like the most prolific genius writer out there who's just constantly putting books out. I have no idea what he sounds like. I have a vague idea of what he looks like. if you want to have fun, go read William Bowman's Wikipedia entry. That's as good as most books, but he's done exactly that. Like he doesn't go anywhere and do anything. Well, he constantly goes somewhere, but he never appears in public. I don't know.
That's a really interesting point about hearing somebody's voice and then not being able to shake that as the voice when you read them, in whatever. Because I remember the first time that happened to me was when the sports writers started going on TV, and all of a sudden Mike Lupica and Bob Ryan and Will McDonough, people that I'd grown up reading. And I knew what Bob Ryan's voice sounded like because he used to go on local radio in Boston, but for the most part, didn't really know the voices. And then you would hear the voices and, Will McDonough started going on the NBC NFL show in the late 80s. And he just had this old school, like he's like a character from The Departed or The Town, had one of those voices. And then when you read his pieces, you would kind of hear that voice. So I get it. Yeah, I'm sure nobody really likes their own voice and nobody's really happy with anyone else's voice with about 5 exceptions. So I'm sure it does. It is probably a little bit of a detriment. I was thinking more the photos, selfies thing just has to slow the process down because I remember when I did my last tour, sometimes there's a lot of people there and you're just you don't want people to wait in line if they have to do whatever. And the selfies, pictures thing would slow it down even more because half the time it's like, oh shoot, hold on. Oh, I didn't realize my flash wasn't on. And there's and you're just in that constant situation where somebody's phone isn't working.
Yeah, well, that it slows things down a little bit. I guess, at the same time, it's like, where else do I have to be? I have the time.
You're there, you're there all night.
Like I said, like the thing in Texas, like in Austin, the one that I did with Shay. Okay. A lot of people came. I think a lot because Shay is really good at getting people out. Okay.
Yeah.
And at the bookstore in Austin, they actually set it up. They have a person from the bookstore who stands in front of the table and you hand them your phone and then you walk behind the table and that person takes a picture. So, well, here's the thing though. By doing that, every person does it. Like they almost think it's part of the process. I mean, every book I signed, I feel like I took a picture with someone.
So you feel like you're like Barack Obama. You're like Barack Obama at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where you're just people are in a receiving line, and you're taking the same picture with them over and over again.
The difference being when someone meets the president, they probably think, I want to get photographed with this person. I think a lot of people who come to my reading, it never fucking occurs to them that I can take a picture with him. But when someone says, so if you try to make the system more efficient, it actually makes things slower yet. That's why those little Post-it notes sometimes at book readings, they give everyone a Post-it note with the idea that they'll put their name on it and then you can sign their name in the book and you'll have the spelling. But then every single person does it. Instead of just having the book signed, they think, it's supposed to be personalized to me specifically. So then they all do it, and that actually makes the whole process go much longer. But I can't really complain about the time it takes. I mean, it's amazing to me that people come and listen to me just talk for 90 minutes. That's bizarre to me. I'm very flattered. It's very weird, but they do it. So I figure if they do that, plus they're spending whatever it costs for the book, $26 or whatever.
Yeah.
I can sit there and put the time in.
You're there for the night. That's it. They gave you their time. You're going to give them. Yeah, I totally get it. I loved, it was definitely, it's a lot of people and you have to be on at some of the stops, but I loved the book tour. I remember one of the stops, I think New York, I had, in 2009, I had 2 of my buddies from college, Jacko and House. They just came and sat at the table and just made fun of me and did the whole thing. It's just good to put faces to who's reading you and stuff like that. So that's one reason I would write another book. The reason I would never write another book is I just don't. I just couldn't do it anymore. I think the ship sailed for me.
Yeah. I don't know if the enjoyment of the book signing is worth writing a book for, but it surprises me that you have no desire to write another book. I would, it would seem like that so many people would be like, I wish I could do that. I wish I had the ability to do it or to get into a position where if I did it, people would read it. what is your reason for having no desire to do it?
It's
You
not
can
a
literally write about any subject you want. Well, I know you've done it, but are you
no. It's
telling
not
me you
a
only do things once?
it's not a no desire thing. It's I know what it takes. I honestly, it's like the same reason when I was trying to talk my wife into having a third kid, which didn't go well, by the way. It was a disaster. Um, and she was just like, I've done this twice. I don't want to do it again. I know all the steps and I don't want to put my body through it. And not to compare writing a book to passing a child out of your body, because that's still the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. But I feel the same. Like when she said that, I kind of felt the same way about a book. Like, I know I could probably do it, but I also know like how miserable I would be for those 10 to 11 months trying to get it done and being trapped in it and trying to come up with some angle. Like the logical book for me to write would be to write about basketball, everything that's happened since I wrote the last book, because the league has changed so much the last 10 years and there'd be so many fun different ways to go. And I just once I would start something like that, I that would be all I would be thinking about and doing. And what we're doing here, I'm not able to do that. I can't just shut down and work on that for a year, you know? So that's the reason. I wouldn't want to make it be one of the 7 things I was doing. So
Yeah, I guess you have other kind of,
it'd be too
obligations
hard.
or many more obligations.
Yeah, I'd have to, like, when I wrote my last book, which was way too long, I disappeared for 10 weeks in the summer of '08. Like I was gone. I didn't do anything. I think I probably even did like 3 or 4 podcasts and that was it. But I really respect the people that can go through that grind and know it's going to happen and then do it again. I'm always like impressed by, because
it isn't. I mean, I guess this is one of the many ways we are different. Like the part of putting the book out, to me, that is by far the hardest part. If I could just work on a book for the rest of my life and just be paid for working on it, and it would never come out, that would be awesome. Like I
what does that even mean? Just the whole process of it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if I've said this before, but it's true. Like if I could have just made the amount of money that I would make for putting books out, but all I would do is just keep rewriting and reworking Fargo Rock City, I would be a great life. If I could just kind of constantly rewrite it and make it better and add new things, and I would just write and write and write and write, and there would be it would never leave my life. It would just be there, but it wouldn't go to any other life. It would just be mine. That would be great.
I had when the last contract I signed with ESPN, which was for, I think, like 4 or 5 years, there was a book component to it. And, a book deal, you just turn in the idea and they give you like a third or whatever it is. And I just didn't have an idea and I just never did it. And then my contract was over. I just couldn't summon I actually did have one idea that was not a basketball idea that I still think would have worked, and was fired up about it. And just, at that point, Grantland was going and 30 for 30 and I was on TV and I was just doing too many things. There's no way I could have done it. And so I kind of look back at that and be like, oh man, there was this one moment when I had this idea that I think would have worked. So
can I ask you a ESPN related question?
You love when this turns on me. This is this usually happens at the end of the podcast.
Speculative. This is purely speculative. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think Dan Le Batard wants to be fired? Because the thing is, he would be fine if that was the case. He can't quit though, because because of his contract, I'm sure locks him in that he couldn't work anywhere for like 2 years or whatever. Do you think actually he wants to get fired?
I think the current answer is absolutely not. I think when he did what he did, I still have not talked to him about this, so this is all speculation. I think the initial act was somebody that was like, I don't care what happens. And if this goes down a certain road, that's fine, but I'm going to do this and I don't like this policy and I'm laying it all out there. And I think what happened is, and as somebody who's been in a pretty similar position, definitely different circumstances, but you realize that when you go down that road, but you have all these other people in their lives that are professionally attached to what you're doing, and you see how they're reacting to it. You realize there comes this moment where you're like, am I really ready to take this the whole way or not? And I don't think he was.
Because my thinking was, particularly with Fox Sports 1 and all that stuff, now he could move his whole show, it would seem like. And the audience for his show is big, but it's not like going somewhere else would suddenly make him just this forgotten thing. I think the kind of people who are into that show would follow it. So it almost seemed like he had this leverage where he was hoping he would be fired. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know him. I've emailed with him 4 times or whatever. I don't know him.
I think really it would have been. So I think it would have been Sirius. I don't think it would have been Fox. But part of the problem with that is the other people that are in his orbit, everybody just signed new deals. So it's like, yeah, he could go, but they still have everybody else under contract. It's not that different from what happened when I left Grantland, and they still had a lot of different people that were under contract. So it's not like we all left at the same time. So I think my guess is he was really fired up about it. He had a certain level of conviction for a direction that he thought he wanted it to go. And then when ESPN called his bluff, at that point, it becomes a game of chicken, and you have to decide whether you want to collide into the other car or not. And he obviously didn't want to. So I thought it was pretty fascinating to watch, and I talked about it a little on the podcast last week because, I think if you're ESPN, it's the right move to stay away from all of that stuff. I'm talking as somebody who on Tuesday did a podcast where me and Jacko talked about Trump and the Democrats for 25 minutes. Like, I can do that because I'm in charge of my own stuff here. But I think if you're ESPN, all their ratings for all the talking head shows are up. In general, they've been able to shed that whole perception that they're too liberal, and they want to appeal to all 50 states, and they just want to show sports. So I think as a business move, it does make sense for them. What do they have to gain from Le Batard on his sports show on ESPN Radio, just opining about the faults of the president for 10 minutes? It doesn't add anything to what their mission is.
Well, it's not even, I think, so much the addition or the subtraction. I think that there is this dissonance between a lot of the personalities there and the people who consume ESPN. Because, ESPN is this weird institution where it's entertainment and it's journalism at the same time. Yeah. And, that's sort of the inherent problem with ESPN in general, is that they are a journalistic outlet and an entertainment outlet. And I think the people who work there see it more as a journalistic enterprise, and the people who consume it generally see it as an entertainment enterprise. So it's not, I think people are always kind of, this idea is it's what the politics that they're talking about or how they're doing it. But to a degree, it's like when people watch the Weather Channel, they want to know about weather. I suppose there are political elements. You could talk about climate change or whatever, that could be on the Weather Channel. But for the most part, people are interested in the weather. And I think that when people watch ESPN, of course there are exceptions, but I think for the most part, they see it as this is how I get access to sports. These other things I'm accessing in all these other ways. I don't, I think that is the thing. There's just a little confusion about how the network is perceived by the people who work there.
Yeah. I think the fundamental issue is this. When I was there, the times that I really battled them were because I had been told the rules were supposed to go a certain way. And then I felt like they shifted what they told me, and I think even criticizing Goodell and saying he lied about the Ray Rice thing and all that stuff, which was a big part of why I got in hot water when I was there. I felt like I was totally justified to do that because they told me, if you stick by the facts and it's a sports related thing and you're able to back up what you're saying, then anyone's fair game. So I'm like, great. So, when I went after Goodell those last years, I was like, the guy did lie. Like, dude, he completely contradicted himself. We have all these testimonies of people that were in the room at the Ray Rice thing. Like, he lied. He suspended him for one thing, and then he changed his story. I should be allowed to talk about this. And
my take on this remains, and I've told you this before. I think it is the confusion over when you said, I challenged someone to call me on this. Now, you say that you were talking about the NFL, but listening to it, it almost seemed like you were saying it to ESPN. And if you run ESPN, there was already the situation where I know a lot of the people in Bristol did not love the idea of Grantland. They sort of felt that it was given like a too much leverage and too much freedom, and was kind of able to do the things they wanted to do and weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
So I think if they hear this and they perceive you as challenging the entire organization to sanction you, like, I guess I'd have sanctioned you too if I was skipper.
Yeah, I've said this last week. My big mistake was not listening to it before it went up, because that was an easy edit, and I feel like I could have kept all that other stuff. And if they had, I had always been told it was 2 weeks for the challenge ESPN and the 1 week for just calling Goodell a liar and being so adamant and saying fucking when I said he was a fucking liar. I think that was what pushed it over the edge. I'd always heard it was the combo of that, but when I came back, I didn't back off from it. And I remember I had Don Van Natt on a podcast where we just painstakingly went over the whole Goodell stuff. Cause they were like, if you're going to hang this guy, hang him with facts. And we did like a 70-minute podcast, just like painstakingly doing all the facts to be like, all right, if you want me to hang him with facts, I'm happy to do that. But the key is it was a sports topic. And I think it was a relevant sports topic because the guy's in charge of the most popular sports league and he was acting inappropriately. And that's something you should be able to talk about on ESPN. I think the people running ESPN now would agree with that. I think where it gets a little dicey is when somebody's like, here are my thoughts on the current president who I don't like. And they just don't want that. They've made that clear. So if somebody's going to say, well, I'm giving my thoughts anyway, then don't work there. And that's why I don't know how I feel morally about ESPN just saying like, we're out, we're not getting involved in the sports thing at all. But I do think it came from a place where once you open the door and allow people to kind of, you give them the window to be able to say and do kind of whatever they want about non-sports stuff. There's kind of no putting the rabbit back in the box? What is that? What's that phrase?
Oh, the horse back in the barn.
The horse back in the barn, whatever. Like once it's out,
back in the match,
you can't stop it. So they're just saying like, look, we're out. We don't want this anymore. Don't do this. If you want to do this, go work somewhere else. We're happy to let you out of your contract. So I think that's where we are.
And it's a complicated deal because, on the one hand, I guess my natural inclination is always to sort of let people who are paid to be commenters sort of take the conversation wherever they want to go. But it does sort of create kind of weird things where, okay, so all these shows, it's always like one or two people, or usually two people, sometimes four people or whatever. If one individual is really being political and the other people choose not to, it's almost like it is seen as them latently taking the opposite position. Like they're somehow supporting what the person is criticizing because it almost, if people start getting political in any sense, it almost sort of demands that everyone do it. Otherwise, like, okay, I mean, The Ringer is a good example of this. Like, you guys don't do a lot of political type coverage, but you do some, and it tends to share the same ideology. And I know the assumption is that everybody at The Ringer thinks the same way politically about everything. But why wouldn't they? Because the only slices of it they see sort of have one sort of position. The assumption is that, well, everyone else must be there. Like, everyone assumes that every employee at the Wall Street Journal is a Republican. That's just kind of what people think because the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal is conservative. I know people who work at the Wall Street Journal. That is not the case, but that is what the assumption is, that you wouldn't work there if you didn't believe that, because for a lot of the audience, they think to themselves, well, I wouldn't be involved in media unless I could sort of project my worldview onto other people. And a lot of journalists don't think that way. Like, particularly the older ones who were sort of told that you were supposed to try to overcome your biases at every turn, and that's different now, but it still exists,
It's also so much different than it was, even 5 years ago. I think I remember I had in 2008 in the spring, I got Obama to come on my podcast. And I had only had a podcast at that point for like a year. And then it got nixed by ESPN, which has been written about. This isn't a new story, but I was always really confused and angry that, because first of all, it would have been the biggest podcast of all time until that point. It wasn't like a really big medium. And I was pretty certain he was going to win the presidency. And I was like, I have a chance to get this guy 6 months before he becomes the president. Like, this is amazing. And that, the reason they squashed it was basically, we don't want to be perceived as leaning one way or the other. But when you think about it in retrospect, what ESPN is doing now with all this stuff really isn't much different than the mindset they had back then, and when they had Obama coming on to fill out the March Madness bracket every year, maybe that's not something they would do now. It stopped because Trump didn't want to do it. But even that could be perceived
Did they ask Trump? I was always wondering about
that.
Because I really thought, I was like, maybe Andy Katz is like, I'm not doing it. But I thought that would have been very entertaining to see. But
oh my God, that would have been the best 10 minutes of TV all year. Trump filling out a March Madness bracket, it would have been incredible. Can they maybe they can still do that for 2020? So my point is, I look at a show like Mike and Mike, which lasted forever. And it was always a show that people, it had its audience. People kind of appreciated it. There wasn't like a rabid Mike and Mike fan base, but it did what it did. And coincidentally, he gave an interview today. We're taping this on a Wednesday, where he was basically saying, I'm not doing politics at all on Get Up, and I'm fine with that. And he gave a quote: when I go to McDonald's, I go there because I want to have a hamburger. And if I walked to McDonald's and they said to me, we're not doing hamburgers today, we're doing pizza, I'd say, what are you talking about? You're McDonald's, what you do is hamburgers. If I wanted pizza, I would go to one of the places where they make better pizza than you. It's a depressing quote, but it's a fair quote too, because people go to ESPN for sports, and if they wanted politics, they would go to one of the politics stations. So what'd you think of that?
Like his quote? Or I think
yeah, just quote? the quote, the mindset.
Well, I mean, I think it in a way sort of, I guess, reflects what I was saying earlier, that I don't think that people go to ESPN for the most part for the idea that they're getting, even though there's a lot of journalism done there, I think that they see that as if I'm watching ESPN and a game is not on, this is the material that connects to the game. Like I got to wait through this or whatever, or I want to see what people are talking about. And sometimes I guess maybe, I mean, I don't know if their political coverage gets them more attention, or if it does. I mean, they had that poll or whatever where they were like 84% of conservatives and 69% of liberals wish there was like less political content on ESPN or don't want politics in there. So that would kind of suggest it was most people. I mean, if those figures can be trusted.
That's a pretty big thing. Hold on, let's take a break. Speaking of ESPN, wanted to talk about, so we're in this dead content time right now where, especially for a site like The Ringer and some other places where, you have these runs, September, October, November, December, that's great. April, May, June, there's just a lot going on. There's playoffs, you got drafts, you have award season, biggest movies coming out, all that stuff. And then you have the dead times. You have what we had last week where there's just nothing going on. And fortunately for The Ringer and for a lot of people who make content, Tarantino had a new movie coming out and it turned into a whole Tarantino week.
Yeah, I'm shocked you haven't seen that.
Well, I was away and I was
you were in Hawaii.
Yeah, I was in Hawaii and it was not playing in a movie theater that was within 90 minutes of us. So that was a problem. I'm seeing it tonight. But this week, is even more dead than last week was because there's no Tarantino movie. We basically have Hobbs and Shaw, and then the Major League Baseball trade deadline and the training camp starting. I guess maybe you could argue this week's slightly better than last week, but just slightly.
Does Hard Knocks start to?
Hard Knocks is a week
next
away.
Week?
Yeah, next week. Next week, things start feeling like normal again. But my point is, so this LeBron thing happens where he's cheering his son on in these AAU games a little too vociferously for some people's liking. And he went in the layup line, did some dunks. And I feel like if this happens in November, I don't even know if it makes PTI. It might make the third segment for 30 seconds when they do one of those buy or sell or like those gimmicks like that. But because it happens this week, it suddenly becomes the biggest sports story for 2 days. Are we just trained now where we just need content every day? We're like a shark swimming around eating fish. And it's like, there's no fish in here. I guess I'll just eat this license plate, where you're just conditioned to eat every 4 hours.
The fact that you just spent 3 minutes talking about the periods of no content, and then the fact that you write a website would suggest to me that you have trained yourself that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have. I think you are. The shark you're describing is the shark that you are.
I'm talking about the whole media machine, because this became the dominant story yesterday on all the ESPN shows. It was the dominant story on any sports website you went to. It was lead topics on podcasts. People were arguing about this.
It's a little compelling because it is something that people who don't follow sports have an opinion on. I have found, like it's a situation where it's like you don't need any knowledge of basketball to sort of have a response to it. What was your response to it? If we're going to talk about it, let's just talk about it. What was your response?
Well, the real reason is because it ties into sports parents, which is a juicy topic that everybody who has either had kids or been to their niece or nephew's game or their cousin's game, we've witnessed sports parent behavior and we have opinions on it. So now you have the most famous active basketball player whose son is a seemingly good prospect, and he is acting like he's the guy's big brother, and really seems to be getting a genuine kick out of everything that's going on, to the point that he's becoming as big of a spectacle as the actual game. So some people are like, what's he doing? That's not how parents should have to act.
Mm-hmm.
And then other people are like, this is great. LeBron's in a dunk line. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with LeBron dunking for a crowd just randomly because he's happy to be there? So it is one of those classic sports stories where you can pick a side, which is, I think, why it became a 2-day story.
Do you have a side?
My side is complicated because I think if anybody else acted that way, they would be mocked on the internet for 5 days, but it's LeBron James and the rules are just different for him. So, it's exciting to have the guy there. My daughter played a game last year when the game before it was LeBron's younger son was playing. So LeBron was there. And when he's in the gym, it's like, it's a thing. Everyone's talking about it. Everybody's feeling it. It's impossible not to concentrate on the fact that LeBron James is there. He's 6'9". Yeah. He stands out.
Here's what I would say on it, I guess. Okay. Mine is complicated too, because it's going to seem like I'm kind of hedging, but this is kind of my response. One thing I do think is, it is pretty interesting that who would have been the model or the example of an NBA dad in the 90s? Sean Kemp. The idea that like NBA players were literally the worst dads, that they just went from city to city, siring children, and then having no relationship. For me, it's the hardest thing about Larry Bird. I hate the fact that he just has no relationship with his daughter, who looks just like him and worships him. And he has maybe he does now, but for a long time he didn't.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that sense, it's like, well, LeBron is not like that, right? LeBron seems like a pretty good dad. I also will say that I understand and empathize with the fact that literally nothing is more exciting than watching your kids succeed at something.
Yeah.
It is the best feeling I have ever had, I think. Like my little guy is in Taekwondo, and when he really good at memorizing stuff, and I love watching it. I can't think of many things that make me happier. But here's the thing. I would say this. It's like I feel that way when I see him, but I don't think you want to ever make the event kind of about your enjoyment of it, or have the interest in the event sort of swing to you. And LeBron is very smart. He knows who he is.
Yeah.
He knows if he does this is going to happen. Like, and he would argue, I'm sure he's like, I'm just excited. I'm not telling people to film me. I'm not signing a contract or with that, but he has to know that, like, he is, you say like the most famous basketball player, I would say the most famous athlete in America. And if he does this, if he dunks in the layup line, of course, in a world where everyone has a phone, that's going to become a story. Now, for the other kids playing, I'm sure it's awesome. I bet they're like, LeBron James is at this game. It's like I'm playing and he's there, and several million people might catch a glimpse of me, getting dunked on by his kid or whatever. It'd be kind of exciting. But there may be a point later in their life when they're like, kind of odd that happened, that like my experience as a youth basketball player ended up mostly being a platform for somebody who's already super famous and super successful. And I don't know. My thing is, I just like, I always wish athletes were more like Robert Parrish. Like, I don't like people displaying emotion in public. It seems performative to me. So
right.
I'm really happy that LeBron loves his kid, and I hope his kid I hope they play together in the NBA. I think that would be amazing. That's something that could happen in baseball. It didn't seem ever possible that it could happen in pro basketball. So I'm not criticizing him. I'm not, I like LeBron, but I wouldn't do that. I mean, there'd have to be a lot of things different about my life to be in that position. But I don't know. It is a little odd to me.
Well, I just want you to know that if you did that, it would also get a ton of YouTube views. I do think people would be blown away. Chuck Klosterman dunking in the layup line, doing taekwondo and the constructor or whatever's going on. I do see, the thing for me is, and I think LeBron is a good kind of case study for this topic, because I was reading G. Tolentino's new book, which I don't even know if it's out yet. But the first chapter,
yeah, they sent to me. I haven't opened it yet, but they sent me a copy.
Yeah,
I bet it's going to be good. She's real talented.
Yeah, she's great. She, I think if Grantland had been around a little longer, she would have been our next hire. We loved her, but this first chapter is about basically how she grew up in the age of the internet, and then how the internet kind of changed over this decade. I don't want to step on it, and I want people to read the book because it's good. But she has this whole thing in there about the performative personality of somebody versus their actual personality, and how the internet started to merge that. Because by the time we get to 2019, I was thinking about it last night. I was watching Rafael Devers is up, my favorite Red Sox player, bases loaded. He's 3 for 4. He's on this 3-month tear, unlike anything I've seen with a young Red Sox player, really since Fred Lynn. And it's this really big moment. They're down a run. They have to beat Tampa. And the pitcher on the Rays is taking forever between each pitch. He's taking 40 seconds, 45 seconds. So it's just a lot of like nothing happening. And I was looking in the background behind Devers, and all these people are standing watching the at-bat, but they're all videotaping it with their iPhone. All of them. And it's like this whole basically stands of people that are all standing up, taping the at-bat that's also on television. And I just think that's what's happened with everything we do now, where it's they tape that at-bat, they put it on Instagram. By the way, I've done this too. And it's kind of like you're performing your own life. You're a version of yourself. The performance you're putting out there, whether it's on Instagram or Twitter, or you have a podcast you're writing, that's your performative profile, basically. So when LeBron's doing this sports parent thing, he's performing the role of a sports parent to some degree. I would think. My question is, would he do that if he didn't know people were going to videotape it? I have no idea.
Well, I mean, even a more complicated question is, does LeBron believe he can go out in public and not be videotaped?
I would say,
how often does it happen that he is in public and someone is not taking his picture?
Right. So when he's doing the dunk lane thing, which by the way, I approve. Again, I'm pro LeBron James in all dunk lines. But he knows how it's going to play out.
He got real high on that. For a second, I was like, are they playing on an 8.5-foot basket or something? I wonder if not playing in the playoffs is going to give LeBron just like 2 extra months of rest. He's going to come back and just rip the league apart. But anyways, back to your point.
Yeah, no, you're right. He played 55 games since
that never happened in like 12 years to him.
Yeah, mid-June 2018 all the way through today, which is now, 15 months later. He's only played 55 games. So
now I hear he might play point guard. So I'm like, is he despite his age, is he the number 1 pick in a fantasy league if he plays point?
Right.
He might be.
I don't think he'll end up playing point. I think he's too old. But
I don't know.
But back to the basic question of the sports parenting thing. What you said before about how the most exciting, probably the happiest thing you've seen in your life was when your son was succeeding at something in sports wise and watching him compete, and just how thrilling that is. I think that's why I do think this really is genuine. I think he loves the fact that his son's good at basketball and he gets to be a fan. I think he can't contain himself.
I don't question his enthusiasm. There's another clip of him talking to his kid once. You've probably seen it. It's like the kid has missed a shot and lost the game. And he's like, actually, you made these 3 key plays. You hit the one guy on the outlet pass that got that layup. You shut the kid down in the corner. And he's like, he made that skip pass. It's like it's not as though, I have a feeling that their relationship, you say like he seems like his big brother. Well, I mean, what is the trajectory of parenting? Every generation of parents is closer to their child emotionally and also like interest-wise and all of those things. And the previous generation always says, like, you're not supposed to be your kid's friend. You're supposed to be your kid's parent. And yet you can go back generations upon generations. Everyone is closer to their kid than they were to their dad, and their dad was to their grandpa. Like, that's how it works,
Yeah. Well, the other thing I would say, he's not that much older than his kid. So he really is, in some ways, he kind of is that in that big brother range. LeBron's 35 and his son is 14. So, my daughter's 14 and I'm 49. So I feel like more like the old, way older person. But he really is more of a contemporary. They probably listen to the same music. My dad was like that. My dad's only 21 years older than I am, and we were always like really close like that. So, but the one thing I would say with LeBron, when he was at that basketball game, when my daughter was playing the next game, his son's game ended, and then we had warm-ups for my daughter's game. And, it was like 10 minutes, and LeBron came back out because his team, I guess they were talking to the team or whatever, packing up, getting ready. And LeBron came out and watched the first quarter of my daughter's game. And there was no reason for it other than he just likes basketball. He was like in a gym and there was a basketball bouncing, and he just kind of was like, I just love basketball. I'm going to watch this. He's watching an 8th grade basketball game, girls, that he does not know, and was just like, I'm just going to watch this. So I really just think he genuinely loves basketball.
You were there sitting like with the guy from the Game of Thrones, and like, Judd Nelson was probably
baseball.
there, and like Ed Norton, and you're sitting around and you're like, oh, look, there's LeBron.
Paul Lynde was there from Hollywood Squares.
Your very normal life where LeBron watches your daughter play basketball. It's a normal thing. We can all relate to it. Everyone listening to this podcast is like,
that's why it's a great story. Listen, this is the shit that happens when you're in LA. But I was so proud of my daughter's team. I thought they would just throw every ball out of bounds and just be completely nervous.
Did she step it up? Did she
be
like LeBron's here? Yeah.
No, she was like, she came in after and was like, see how well I played because LeBron was watching? I was like, all right, settle down. But yeah, he does. I think his love for basketball has always been really genuine from day one. And I think the Zion what I've seen from him so far, I feel like is very similar in that respect, where you have these guys who are phenomenal athletes, but who also seem like they just genuinely like the sport and they just like playing and being around a gym and just being in the mix. And I think those are the guys that end up usually making it, like in the biggest possible way.
I saw footage of Zion throwing a football around with Drew Brees. He was throwing a pretty good spiral. I was looking at it on my phone, so I couldn't see that tight, but it looked okay.
Oh yeah, you act like
just rap.
You act like I didn't study that one. Yeah, to me, like watching guys like Zion play another sport, I would just watch hours and hours of that. Like Zion playing hockey, Zion playing baseball, whatever. Hold on, let's take another break. All right, so I have not seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood yet. I'm actually seeing it tonight, but I have been really, really into the Manson family revival of just like a new generation of people finding out about that story and how fucking crazy it was. And, I think all of us in our general age range went through, you would have your Watergate week, you would have your Manson family week, where you just like kind of deep dive different topics that had been around for a little while. And you would just kind of be like, wow, what's this? And either watch or read everything about it. Manson family and the Helter Skelter book and the 2-part movie with Steve Railsback. Like I was in on all this stuff. Now we have this new book comes out that takes all this stuff that I had already thought about, digested and accepted in my head, that Charles Manson was this crazy cult leader who had this band of women that he would have sex with and who were just completely loyal and faithful to him. And he decided he would start this helter-skelter war between whites and blacks. And then they would recede into their ranch after it started, wait for everyone to kill each other, and then emerge as the new leaders of this whole revolution. It was the single craziest heat check theory I think anyone's ever had, and awful for 19 different reasons. But this was actually what carried the day in court. Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor, convinced the jury that this was Manson's plan. And it seemed like the evidence was there that this actually really was the plan. And now 20 years later, this book comes out, and this guy who spent way too much time and basically his life fell apart as he researched it and reported it and hit dead ends and all this stuff, and then ends up releasing the book and has now turned that history on its ear. I know you care about this. There's no way you don't. What are your thoughts?
Well, okay. First of all, I haven't read the book yet. Okay. I haven't read this new book. Okay. I'll say this. Okay. The idea that Manson did not really mastermind like the LaBianca murders and all that has existed for a while. There was a long sort of held belief that maybe Tex Watson was doing a speed deal, and it was it was a speed deal that went wrong or whatever. And the whole idea of Manson listening to the White Album, thinking Helter Skelter was a description of this coming race war, that really was entered into the conversation by Bugliosi. That was sort of his thing. I mean, he wrote the book Helter Skelter. So is it possible that that these murders actually played out very differently than sort of our historical record, and that they were closer to just like bad hippies and not really murderers? I don't know, possibly. I will say this though: if the book, as you say, it indicates that Manson was actually a CIA operative, there is a lot of evidence to contradict that, particularly his whole life growing up. I mean, there was a very good book about Manson that came out 5 years ago that does I think it's just called Manson, that really does a pretty granular, investigation of his early life. And there's absolutely no way that the CIA would target this person to be their operative. I don't even know what to understand the counterculture they were using him. And then in order to make sure the cover works, they put him in jail for the rest of his life. And he's like, sure, I'll do it. Obviously he was in a cult. Obviously Squeaky Fromm and Susan Atkins and all these people they would carve X's in their heads with knives to show their support for him. He was obviously leading this cult. So I'll probably read this book, but it's going to have to be pretty persuasive to persuade me.
The writer is Tom O'Neill. He gave an interview with the New York Times a couple of days ago, and he said, they asked him, why is the CIA referenced in the book title? And he said, it may sound like a crazy conspiracy theory. That's how he starts. But I discovered a lot of evidence that right after Manson was released from prison in 1967, he was spending a lot of time in the same medical clinic in San Francisco, where it's been documented that a CIA employee was recruiting subjects for studies of LSD and its ability to influence behavior. Coincidental or not, Manson suddenly transformed from a harmless little ex-con who nobody ever gave a second glance to an all-powerful guru surrounded by a harem of women who would do anything he asked, including kill complete strangers. So the Times says, okay, Manson as a Manchurian candidate, that's pretty crazy. So this guy responds, well, it's a documented fact. The CIA had a program called Chaos, and the FBI had one called COINTELPRO. The object of both at the time was secret operations, destabilize the left-wing movement, make hippies appear dangerous. And if this was a government operation, boy, did they succeed. Do you believe this now more or less after I read that?
Well, I mean, okay, he's right about one thing. If this was the plan, it worked. It's the one time the CIA did something that succeeded like they could not kill Castro. They considered trying to poison his mustache. But if this is the one that worked, it worked very well. I'm sure. I mean, everyone kind of knows now the CIA was giving people LSD to see what would happen and see if it could be used to create, super soldiers or the truth serum, all that stuff. But at the same time, there are many, many, many people who have taken LSD and had a big trip and then became themselves again.
Right.
There are many more of that than there are people who become, and it also, in 1969 in LA, it's not like LSD was very, very accessible. Like you don't need the CIA to give it to you. Like you could get it. About the Tarantino movie, I'm not going to give anything away because you haven't seen it yet. But I will say this: there's a lot of interesting things about it. I really liked it, but it has been a very long time since someone made any kind of art that was this anti-hippie. Because that has really fallen out of favor, especially among young people. I mean, we talk to young people about the late 60s. It's pretty clear who they think the heroes were.
Yeah.
And it is really surprising to see. It's almost like a Mad Magazine from the 70s. They hate hippies so much in this movie. It was jarring, might be too strong of a word, but I was surprised by it. I did not. Granted, the hippies that they're using are the worst hippies that ever lived. I mean, unless this book upends this. But they sort of, like Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio are people who are like, we're of the 50s. And this is how we think of hippies. And that's interesting.
Yeah. I'm surprised. This is the 50th anniversary of just a lot of stuff. Summer of 69, I think, was one of the most iconic summers that we've had. And I'm surprised that Manson had a bigger shelf life with the whole nostalgia crowd this summer than Woodstock did. I really expected Woodstock to the 50th anniversary and all that stuff to be this, but it's interesting. Woodstock 99, which coincidentally we're doing a podcast about for Luminary right now, but it seems like Woodstock 99, just because it was closer in time, it was only 20 years ago, is more interesting to somebody who's under 30 than Woodstock in 1969 and all these bands are. And I wonder if that era is now kind of dying off.
Well, part
musically.
of it has to do also with Charlie Manson never disappeared from the culture. Like he was a very prominent culture in the 80s when the relationship between heavy metal and Satan was common. Axl Rose covers the Charlie Manson song on their punk covers record. It's like the secret track of Look at Your Game Girl. It's actually kind of a pretty good song, but you're not supposed to say that now because Charlie Manson wrote it. There was a release of the music he had recorded in prison. I think I got this in like 1995 or 1996. He was on the cover of Spin magazine once. Like Manson has always been like a figure in culture because he seemed to sort of obviously embody a lot of the qualities that are incorrectly applied to countercultural activities.
Yeah.
Like he actually sort of embodies in a lot of ways like the worst nightmare people would make up about rock music or whatever. Whereas Woodstock, you know, that music, like, you know, Crosby, Stills and Nash and stuff like that, like that was just kind of gone from like the middle 80s well into the 90s. You hear it a little bit more. I think it's kind of being reappreciated now, but there was like a lot of the artists who performed at the original Woodstock, it was not like, nobody was listening to the Woodstock soundtrack in the early 90s. That was not like an artifact people cared about. Yeah.
So my son started playing bass about 2 months ago and is really into it. And a lot of the songs that he likes are these classic rock songs. And there's just songs I haven't thought about and bands I haven't thought about in years, because why would you? But like he's playing Sunshine of Your Life by Cream. And
that's a hard song to play. Jack Bruce was a real good bass player. That's pretty impressive if he can play that.
Well, he likes that. He likes there's a few of them. But it's just funny that like when I was growing up, so we're talking like 81, 82, and I started getting into music, 1981, 1982. And we just didn't have a big library of music to kind of dive into, right? So classic rock had this incredible power and kind of, it was 14 years of music, you know, like the Steve Miller Greatest Hits band. That album has just kind of disappeared at this point, but was one of the biggest albums of the 80s and an album that was on at every party I went to in high school. But now I look at the kids, if you're like 14 now, like my daughter, and you're really getting into music, you have 50 plus years of music to draw from. It's kind of staggering. Like, I don't even know where you would begin. So you have stuff like the whole classic rock genre is just kind of gone, because like somebody like my son would have 30 plus years of hip hop to go through. He likes hip hop more than rock. So it was just kind of startling to me that we have enough music now to last like for the rest of our lives, basically. But when I was in like 1983, I didn't feel like we had enough. I was always like excited to discover a new album.
Well, and also when you first get into music in 83, how old are you in 83? You're like 13 or something.
I was like 14. 13, 14, okay. Yeah.
You know, when I was getting into music in the 80s, bands like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and Rush, to me, seemed too old for me to be into. Like I was into Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses and Poison and Tesla and all the bands that were happening then. Because when you're young, it doesn't take a lot for something to seem too old. Now, Black Sabbath doesn't seem any older now than they did when I was
right
a kid in 1985, because time has changed with this. Like the ability to sort of control what we listen to has increased so much, where it's like you don't have to worry about like whether or not you're being exposed to this on the radio or if you own records or whatever.
Well, and I also think,
you know,
go ahead.
Also kids just list now because of downloading music. I mean, as everyone has said this, it's like people don't really get into albums ever. It's like, it's just individual songs. So like it's your son probably knows maybe one song by Cream or two songs by Cream. It would have been very weird for somebody having that experience in 1990 to only know two Cream songs, because that would mean they consciously did not play the rest of the best of Cream records they got.
Yeah, that's true. And I think Queen is the best example of this. Like my kids absolutely love Queen and they love the movie, which is hilarious. I think they were probably the IQ level of the audience for that movie. But there's, you know, Queen, I would say, had like 5 or 6 really, really iconic, memorable songs. And that's all you really need to do. Queen was around for, I don't know, I can't remember when they started, but they were around for a solid decade. When I was in the moment.
More than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then Freddie did a couple solo albums, all that stuff. But in the moment, I never considered them even remotely on par with somebody like Elton John. I just didn't. I just felt like they were a level below, 2 levels below Rolling Stones. Bohemian Rhapsody was obviously, you know, an all-timer, but it was just the body of work just wasn't there. And really the Live Aid performance in a weird way was kind of their Apex Mountain, to borrow a Rewatchables term, where they just blew everybody away on a day when like everybody was there. And now it's been funny to watch that evolve over the course of history, where now my son assumes that they were probably the biggest band of that era. They were bigger than the Rolling Stones, bigger. My son was like, Dad, we just watched Bohemian Rhapsody this weekend. He's like, Dad, when they played Live Aid, was that like the biggest thing ever? And I was like, no, it was actually a much bigger deal that Led Zeppelin was there. The Queen was a fucking afterthought.
What you're saying is kind of instructive. First of all, it's like Queen probably was the biggest band in the world in England, because even like Robert Plant has a certain degree of like jealousy toward the amount of coverage that Queen would get, because they were just seen as sort of more, I don't know, like a more polished, less, you know, even like a more polished or more like sort of, I don't know,
well, wouldn't you say
sort of thing.
Wouldn't you say they were more liked than beloved, like just appreciated in UK?
Well, I mean, here's what I was, okay. So you say, when you describe Queen, you're like, so you say like they have 4 or 5 kind of iconic songs, and these are like, you know, how we understand Queen. What is interesting is that if you were a Queen fan in the 70s or the 80s, you would have never thought of them as a singles band. Yeah. They were an album band. If you like, it would be pretty uncool for a Queen fan in 1978 or 79 to say Bohemian Rhapsody is his favorite Queen song. That would suggest he really wasn't a Queen fan. Or Another One Bites the Dust. That was actually probably had a bigger spike in the moment than any of their other songs. But that was like it was sort of seen as outside of what was good about the band. But now you're probably right. Now for most people, Queen is a collection of 5 or 6 songs. And what that does prove is that pop music is more important than rock music. It just is. Like rock music is cooler. I obviously prefer it. But pop music is more important because it sort of transcends time. Like when you think of the biggest pop artists of the 20th century, it's like Sinatra, Michael Jackson. You know, it's like these people, you know, Elvis. These people who are famous to people who have no relationship to the music, you know, because pop music means it's popular music. It is popular. Right. That's what people want, is popular things. So Queen now, when you think of them historically, the average person, not somebody who thinks about rock music for a living, but like the average person, what they really think about is the pop extension of their rock catalog. The songs they made that were played on pop radio. One of the interesting things about like the debate between like rockist people and poptimists or whatever is they use all these kind of complicated arguments to explain why pop is so important. All they really have to say is it affects the culture more. Like it doesn't matter what the reason is. It's just something in pop music is important because it's important to people who barely care. So, I mean, like the way your son views Queen, that's probably how Queen will be thought about going forward. Yeah.
Oh, I don't think it's even probably. Like, but by the way, just for the record, I always thought Radio Gaga was a terrible song, even in the 80s. I'll never change my mind on that one. I'm not a fan. But
what do you think of One Vision? One Vision's used really well in the movie Iron Eagle.
That is true. Well, I don't feel, here would be my case for Queen was a level below. Like Freddie Mercury released 2 solo albums in I think like 85 and 87. And, you know, I'm sure it was a pretty big deal in the UK, but it just really wasn't a big deal in America. And
well, it wasn't. That Mr. Bad Guy record actually is great. Okay. And then the second record he made with a popular opera singer from Italy. And people kind of critically like that record more. I don't like it as much. But your argument is that I just wanted to make sure that I stated this record was good. So you're saying he made those solo records. They weren't huge.
Well, I think he didn't stand out in the mid 80s like about 10 to 13 other people, because that was also, you know, you're talking about one of the most action-packed, loaded eras we've had of just stars. You know, like you like Springsteen and Madonna and Michael Jackson. Like these are like all timers, and they were all kind of peaking around the same time. Um, but I just felt like the Live Aid thing. The movie does one of the only good things that movie did was do a nice job of pointing out that they kind of needed that performance. You know, that especially they had broken up and they had lost momentum and they were kind of an afterthought.
Really break. You know, the movie has them not together for a period where they put a record out.
Right.
Like it's like the movie. Like it wasn't like they came back together again for Live Aid. It was just sort of the most for a lot of reasons like the most memorable performance. I mean, like Zeppelin's performance at Live Aid was terrible. Black Sabbath wasn't that good. You know, there was a handful of people who performed, and it was like a weird deal because it was like this short 20-minute set in a like the ultimate festival situation, and they performed real well.
See, my memory of Live Aid was it being pretty disappointing, and the sets feeling like they weren't long enough, and the Zeppelin thing was such like a wah, wah. Like the hype for that versus what actually was delivered. I remember like from a musical standpoint, I like the Prince's Trust concerts more because they would put the CDs of those out, and those had really good bands that were kind of on their way up, and those were like good compilation albums. But I'm
kind of a weird thing, you know. I didn't watch Live Aid.
Oh, really?
It's so weird.
You're a tiny bit younger than I am.
Well, no, it wasn't age. It was on TV, but I was just like, Motley Crue's not playing. Like Rat's
I'm
not
out.
playing. Like none of the bands I wanted to see were playing. So I was like, I'm not watching. I don't want to see. You know, I don't know. Like where? I don't want to see Annie Lennox or whatever. I want to see, you know, LA Guns or whatever. So I didn't even watch it.
I do think it's amazing though that if I had said to you 2 years ago, there's 2 movies coming out. One is about the life of Elton John, and one is basically the life of Queen. Only the band is really heavily involved, and they're not going to go into any of the really interesting Freddie Mercury stuff. It's just going to be a hagiography. Which one do you think will do better? I think Elton John would have been like a 10-1 favorite.
Yeah, well, I mean, particularly if you include the word hagiography, I'd like it's probably going to be bad. But you know, people like hagiographies about people they like. That's kind of, you know, it's like they like this Mr. Rogers movie is coming out. Like I have to say, this Tom Hanks movie, like if it's like gonna problematize Mr. Rogers, I don't want to fucking see it. Like I have no interest in seeing a movie that complicates the identity of Mr. Rogers. Like, you know, I mean, maybe it doesn't. I have no idea. I just seen the trailer.
I saw the doc that I really like. I really like the documentary, and I just don't feel like I need to see the movie.
Well, the thing is, when you watch the documentary, though, it doesn't raise this question. It talks very little about his childhood, and his childhood sounds real interesting. But like, it could be too interesting. Like, it could be too interesting in a way that's like, it's like I don't want to be that interesting, you know. So I was like, I don't want to know.
Hold on, let's take a quick break.
I want to talk to you about something else that it happened on this book tour, and since I'm kind of doing this to promote the release of Raised in Captivity, I thought I would mention this. Okay, so I'm doing an event in Boston, and like Tom Perrotta is interviewing me on stage. It's so cool of him to do that. I'm actually doing one with David Shields in Seattle. That's kind of exciting. That's coming up next week.
Black Planet.
But anyways, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and have you seen his Marshawn Lynch film? It's pretty cool.
No,
but regardless. The people are coming up asking lots of questions, and this guy asked me, what do you think about the people who are going to storm Area 51? And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, these people have gotten together on the internet. They've kind of made this decision that they're going to storm Area 51, you know, in Roswell, New Mexico. And I was like, I don't know much. I don't know anything about this. I haven't heard about it. The guy goes back to his chair, and I'm kind of just making jokes about it. And I'm like, you know, I wonder when is this going to happen? And then a different person in the audience yells out, September 20th. Now, there's 100 people at this.
Yeah.
So now at least 1/50th of this audience knows about this, you know, and September 20th is interesting. It's my anniversary. But it's also going to be the day when all these people apparently are going to get together outside of maybe Las Vegas or something, supposedly go to Area 51 and just kind of, they say like they can't stop all of us. We're just going to come in mass and like get inside there and see what they've been hiding. And the military now has basically said, well, if you attempt this, which I'm sure you're not, but if you do, we are going to shoot people. Like, we're going to shoot people who try this. Now, maybe they're just trying to be threatening or whatever, but I mean, it's a military base. I'm just curious, what do you think about the idea of a whole bunch of people trying to get into Area 51?
Well, as we head to the end of this decade, isn't it the logical conclusion to a really bizarre decade of people mobilizing with weird causes on the internet and then actually following through with weird proclamations? Like this is Pizzagate, but like a more relatable Pizzagate, where we all have thought about Area 51 and had takes on it and wondered about it. So now you have all these people who have just said, we're fucking going there. And it might actually happen. Like, my kids asked me about this a couple days ago. They were like,
it's a much bigger deal. I couldn't believe that two people, at least, I don't know how many people at this reading stayed quiet after I sort of acted like, what in the hell is going on? Why are all the people here knowing it? It is for the longest time, there was, you'd hear about an Air Force guy or something, saw something he couldn't explain. It's like that. Well, you hear this a lot. But prior to the early 90s, the assumption was always, well, it's probably Russian stuff, right? Like, it's probably, Russian military personnel. Like, that's probably what we're seeing. And it's kind of scary because who knows what they have. Well, then Russia falls, Soviet Union falls. We now know all about their technology.
Yeah.
As it turns out, for the most part, they were ahead of us on some stuff, but mostly behind us, and definitely didn't have anti-gravitational drive or anything like that. So now, even in the New York Times, you will see a story about what information does the government have about extraterrestrial beings visiting Earth or whatever. Let's say you were president. Okay, you're President Bill Simmons.
Yeah.
And you are briefed that it was in Area 51, there is a crashed spacecraft. And we did find the corpse of an alien. And we did dissect him. And we found out all these things. But the information you found is very troubling. It is something that would definitely cause people to be very alarmed. Would you say continue suppressing it? Or would you feel as though, well, this does seem like something of the national interest, it must be told?
So you've had how many presidents since this allegedly happened?
Okay, let's see. Well,
at least 8, 9, 10,
2,
right?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 or 10.
Yeah.
I think if I'm right.
So if your theory is correct, which I enjoy the theory, and I'm debating about whether I want to support it. I'm very close. All of those presidents would have come to the same conclusion that people can never know about this because they'll be really disturbed. Now, we have a president in office now who doesn't care about stuff like that and probably wouldn't mind people being disturbed about something like this and would bring it up when he kind of needs something to deflect everybody from something else he doesn't want people talking about for 2 days. So I could see him, if it was that disturbing, I think he's the one who would kind of tell us about it, which makes me think it's all smoke and mirrors and nothing actually happened. So,
well, I mean, so much time has passed, though. It may now just be when the president asks, what's going on in Area 51? And they go oh, nothing. Nothing.
They're lying to him about it. We don't know what Area 51 is.
Because it's a kind of a curious thing. It's if you were president, would you be interested in getting more into reinvestigating the JFK assassination or Area 51 or any of these things? That would be one of your platforms.
This is one of the many reasons I can't be president, because I would take office and I would immediately try to find out the answers to 8 things that have always bothered me. I'd be like, hey, just can you just show me all the JFK stuff? Can you show me the stuff nobody's seen? The stuff that can't be released until 2025. Just can I have that at my desk by Monday? And just the actual video of the first 5 moon missions. I just want to look at it. Just give me a gander. Someone check it out. I want to see the unedited, not the director's cut. I'd want to see all that stuff, but that's why I can't be president. The real president should be trying to go through his agenda. We have the ability now to videotape everything immediately. So the whole thing with UFOs was it was always somebody grabbed their camera at the last second and there was something up there and they were able to get like a terrible video camera footage of it. But now it's 2019. We live in a world where Rafael Devers is up at bat, bases loaded, and every person in the ballpark is videotaping it. Wouldn't you think like the number of available cameras, the number of times people are just shooting things with their camera, which I would say has increased by what, 1 billion times what it was 25 years ago?
Probably.
Wouldn't the number of accidental UFO sightings have also increased proportionally? Wouldn't we be getting one every 6 weeks?
They actually have, apparently. Particularly in Russia and in Europe, it's much more common to have those dashboard cameras.
Yeah.
A lot of people have dashboard cameras, and that seems to be where a lot of this is coming from. I think there has been an uptick in this. I don't know if it is commensurate with the number of people who are now kind of randomly shooting things with their camera, but in general, there does seem to be a more of a willingness for kind of credible military and political leaders to want to have this conversation, and because they've always sort of worked from this interesting premise, mathematically, it's almost a guarantee that life exists in the universe outside of us.
Right.
I mean, like the math demands that be the case. If there aren't, that's the best argument for God possible, that this would somehow only have happened once in this one place. However, while conceding that the math says there must be aliens, the idea is but we'll never reach them. They'll never reach us. Space is infinite. So it's who knows what the distance is. It's kind of interesting to have both of those thoughts at the same time. I mean, if you accept that within infinity, everything that can happen will happen, there's actually a lot of opportunity for life to exist in space. So why is it so unthinkable that there would be cultures who could travel at a much higher rate of speed than we can? Our understanding of science could be very primitive to some other world. I mean, these are all obvious thoughts that people have said a million times, but I would be surprised if in my lifetime contact is made with aliens, but I think there are other things that would surprise me more. Yeah.
I just looked over at nephew Kyle, and if there was a giant bowl right now that he could just smoke from, that monologue you just had, he was like, it was the only thing he was missing. He was like, yeah, he was really into it. I do think it's interesting how many people care about aliens versus how it's dispersed in popular culture, because think about there's that famous Will Smith story where he wanted to be the biggest star in the world, and he looked at the box office and realized 5 of the top 9 movies were alien movies, and was like, I need to start making alien movies. And just that became a career directive. And it is true. If you look at the biggest movies of all time, it's basically aliens and superheroes. So people do care about this stuff, and we do have the technology that would be able to capture any weird event, but they always seem to be happening in Russia and these countries that aren't here. The Area 51 thing, it seems like people are now trying to force this to happen. They're forcing an alien encounter. They want to almost manufacture it themselves because they've been dissatisfied that they haven't been able to have it. So I don't know. That would be my theory.
Well, it is an odd thing. When I was in college, I took a class on UFOs. We had a UFO class by a guy named John Salters, who's in the Indian Studies program. I guess it would be Native American Studies program now. He was a big guy involved with civil rights, like he knew Medgar Evers. He did all these things. He was very, very political, but he also was very insistent that he had been contacted by aliens early in his life. And we had this, so it was like a 2-credit class, weirdly, in the Indian Studies program about UFOs. But, so we talked about all the different kind of encounters. He always, I'll never forget this. Like, I forget so much stuff I learned in college, but I remember this is like, he was describing like things that were different about him after the UFO contact, because his argument was that UFOs contact the most open-minded people. That they're good. They're not here to hurt us. They're slowly contacting the most open-minded people, to sort of kind of come out of our society. So he had 3 things that happened immediately after he was contacted by these aliens. One was that he no longer had anxiety. He was completely at ease all the time.
Wow.
All anxiety he had ever had was gone. The second one was that he had never been able to grow a beard, but now he had to shave every day. He could grow a beard in a week if he tried. He was like, he'd never been able to grow a beard. Now after the encounter, he could grow a beard. But the third one was always the strangest one. Prior to contact, he said he hated peas, but now was ravenous for them. That any opportunity he had to eat peas, he would. Although growing up, he despised them.
Wow.
But these are the three things that happen apparently if you get abducted by a UFO.
So it's almost like when your wife is pregnant and they have like a craving for boneless chicken wings or something. He has a craving for the rest of his life for peas.
Yeah, but then peas come from pods, right? So we often talk about UFOs being pod people, correct? So maybe the UFO sees the peas on Earth as like the closest extension of who they are, and therefore they have some kind of metaphysical connection with peas because they come from pods. And therefore, if you meet these aliens and you exchange ideas and you exchange emotions, you will then want to consume, the alien life force, which is the common pea.
Amazing. Let's take one more break. All right, last topic, then we're going to go. I texted you a bunch of possible topics for us to talk about, and one is, why can't we find a presidential candidate that everybody gets excited about, and is that even possible anymore in 2019? And if it was possible, what would that candidate look like?
Oh, I misunderstood. I thought you were saying like, I'm looking at these candidates and like they all seem bad, because I got to say, I've been pleasantly surprised by the field of candidates. I mean, like, I don't know. It's been a long time since I have liked a candidate as much as I like Pete Buttigieg. I think he's I think he's a real thoughtful person. And, and like even in the debate last night, I mean, there's another one now tonight, but the one from Tuesday when, like, Warren and Sanders were talking about the idea of trade and how it's like, if you give businesses the opportunity to build a factory in Vietnam to save 5 cents, they're going to do it every time. So we almost have to create legislation to stop them from doing that. The other candidates were sort of like, well, that's antithetical to what trade is. It's like, we've got to be able to trade with our allies. I thought it was, I've been, for the most part, maybe, I don't know. I have kind of found a lot of these individuals more competent than I would have guessed. Yeah.
So you're comparing them to years past, like even 4 years ago. You feel like competency is higher.
I'd watched all the Republican debates when Trump was running, and these debates are so different. I mean, like they're the people are so different. I mean, you still get some stupid stuff. You get like, people arguing over what's really patriotic. Like, is this patriotic or is this action patriotic? It's like the difference between patriotism and nationalism is semantic. Being patriotic is stupid. Okay? There's no reason to love a place more because you happen to have been born there. That's just an irrational sort of reaction. So don't try to build it into your policy about like what's the most patriotic thing to like. Are human rights patriotic? Is the economy patriotic? It's like, that's dumb. You still get some of that sometimes, but in general, I find the sort of the discourse pretty good, like pretty interesting.
Wow. Wait. Well, so going back to the question, do you think we'll ever have a candidate again that people remember fondly years later for whatever reason. It could be Republican or Democrat. Cause I think Reagan is somebody that, whether you want to pick apart how his 8 years went, and especially the last couple, I think was somebody that most people liked and just were like, I like that guy. And is that even possible to have anymore?
I mean, it's kind of two questions. Is it possible to have a candidate that people in retrospect will look back at fondly? Absolutely. I mean, look at the way people now perceive George W. Bush. That you can go back and read Village Voice from like 2003 or 2006, and the language they used to describe Bush is identical to the language now used to describe Trump. Yeah. You could search and replace Bush and Trump, you would not know it. Okay, there was a cover of the Village Voice where Bush was a vampire biting the neck of the Statue of Liberty. That was the cover of the Village Voice. But now it's like, he's a painter and he's not so bad at it. And he gives, Obama's wife a Mentos at a state funeral. And boy, he sure seemed kind of reasonable and he could speak Spanish. And like, that has already happened. I think for the most part, Bill Clinton being the odd example because of how culture has changed in terms of like sexual politics, for the most part, anyone who wins the presidency as time passes tends to kind of be beloved. I mean, Jimmy Carter was one of the worst presidents of the 20th century in terms of how much success he had as a president, but he's had a great post-presidential career and people love him now. Now, if you're asking, could there be a candidate in the present tense who is beloved as he or she runs? No way. I mean, partially because the system is set up against that. Like, it would just, how could there be someone even like Obama was a pretty popular president. I think his reputation is about as good as one could hope, having been, away from that job for less than 10 years or whatever. But he was in no way a beloved candidate. I mean, he was criticized in the same degree anybody else is. So, like, I'm not sure. You look at somebody like, Marianne Williamson now, after the debate last night, which I had to kind of see on tape because I missed when it was live, but I was looking at Twitter, and judging from my Twitter feed, she won the debate. Okay, it's like if you use my Twitter feed as an example of the world, it's like Elizabeth Warren's already president, and now Marianne Williamson is vice president or whatever, So she seems, there's like a cult of personality around her that people are just sort of charmed by her, and they're like, do I like her ironically or do I like her seriously? She, of course, is not a serious candidate, but I think that she is pretty close to being a widely liked candidate.
Well, it's funny how as the years pass, when somebody's not in the spotlight position that they are in, then we were like, the George W. Bush thing is a great example. This happens with NBA players, right? This could happen with Chris Webber. It's happened with Vince Carter. This could happen with, we saw Kobe Bryant the last few years and how people just choose to remember either what's happened lately or what their feelings were near the end of the career, and they'll throw away all the other stuff. And then this alternate universe happens about how this player, how their career went versus what actually happened in the career.
First of all, I commend you for always being able to bring it back.
I had to. Listen, I know who my base is, Chuck.
It's sort of like,
I know who my base is.
I can't believe. Well, I know, but it's a really interesting thing. It's like your ability to see the world through the lens of basketball completely validates the success of your basketball book. That is how you understand life. Like, I would think that the reason that you only had 2 kids instead of 3, I would have thought it was your choice because you're like, we have 3, we can only play zone. Like, I want to play math.
All right, now you're getting carried away. No, I think basketball is the only sport where, and especially now, just because
everything can be described.
Well, maybe that's the title of a book. No, I think the personalities are so powerful that sometimes the career takes a different form. I don't know if this happens with other, like in baseball, you're just trapped by the stats, right? Whatever ends up being your legacy is the stats, not however everybody felt then versus now. And then football, the careers are so short, and Joe Montana was great. I don't feel any differently about that 30 years later, 25 years later than I did in the moment. But in basketball, for some reason, it can really shift. And the one person it hasn't shifted for whatever reason, is Carmelo Anthony. There's like this real animosity to him that I find very bizarre.
It is, but I mean, he's still going to try to play this year, right? He's still going to try to play.
Not. I think it's over, but.
Well, you don't think, I mean, I don't, I've been watching him work out. He seems pretty good working out in the empty gym, but I would think somebody would say, well, the thing that, who was it? I think it was Chauncey Billups. It was Chauncey Billups. He said something oddly candid about Carmelo Anthony, which was that he was too interested in getting 30 points.
Yeah.
And it's something everybody knows, but it was real surprising to hear teammates say that.
Right.
Because I do feel like in a lot of ways, they feel like the lock block is shut on my teammates. I'm never going to say these things until we're really old people. So that was surprising. I mean, but now, so let's say it is 10 years from now. Okay. So Carmelo's been out of the league for 11 years or whatever.
Yeah.
I can certainly see whatever version of us who's currently in their 20s or whatever, they're running their, I don't know if podcasts will exist or whatever it will be. And they'll say, do you remember how everybody was just Carmelo's terrible? And then let's call up his numbers. Oh my God, look at this. Oh, he won all these. I could see that changing, especially since
I think it'll happen sooner than 10 years. I think it'll be when he retires. I think there will be an immediate shift and people will be like, hey, you know what? Carmelo Anthony actually was really great. And it'll totally shift for him. But for some reason, because he's still trying to play, I'm just amazed by how much shit he takes. Because, he came within 2 wins of making the finals in 2009. And the 2013 Knicks were really good. I think he was the number 2 MVP pick one year. It wasn't people make it seem now like he was
but the
overrated
analytics guys hate him, and that's a bad group to have turn on you because you can't defend the guy. If the analytics people say Carmelo is actually a fraction of as good as Tobias Harris or whatever the case may be, any argument you use to sort of defend that, they'll just say well, you're not a rational person then. You don't care about evidence. You care about is grit.
What's weird about that is he has some good analytic years though. That's the thing. That's why I feel like it's irrational. You did make me think of something as you were talking about that. If we had analytics like we do with sports for politicians and people were being look, Jimmy Carter's WAR was way higher than people realized in 78. He had incredible year. He did this, that, and the other thing. Because it's, the perception of how somebody did as a Carter was, I thought, when I was really into this stuff, when I was a political science major in college, all that stuff, Carter was, I thought, the most riveting president to study after the fact, because he was the one guy that went into that presidency with real ideals and tried to accomplish them and just got demolished. And it's a really good case study for everybody that came before and after. But I'm sure there's some version of politics advanced metrics that could make a case that he was a better president than we thought.
Well, I would say that there probably would be a version of that, and it would be bad. Because the thing is, analytics only seem to work in sports. They don't even work that well in politics in terms of polling. They end up giving us a specific sense of something that we already sort of agreed on our own. Sports has the most stats.
Yeah.
So every time you see these things let's try to use analytics for the Oscars, or let's try to use analytics to understand I don't know what's the what's the best way to do anything that is not that measurable,
that we don't have numbers.
So Carter one time went on television, and it was kind of during the oil crisis, and he looked into the camera and he was everyone should wear a sweater. Turn your thermostat down and wear a sweater.
Right.
Okay. So now that is an attempt to sort of humanize a real issue, but it did not come across well, You know, so it's like, how do you somehow quantify the fact that when Nixon talks about his dog, people love it, and when Carter talks about his sweater, people think it's crazy? Or like when Carter says, "I was on a boat and I got attacked by a giant swimming rabbit." Okay, like I bet that did happen to him. Why would he make that up? But people are like, the president was attacked by a giant swimming rabbit? What's that like? He's not very presidential or whatever. Like, you know, I don't think there's a way to measure the things that we actually use to understand these people. Like, there's no analytics that would describe why Williamson did well on the debate last night.
It would be funny. You know how like with like basketball or baseball, they're able to put whatever was going on in the era and then adjust the stats that way. So like in basketball, they have like the pace of possession, and baseball, they can do it. It'd be funny if you could do that with politics and be like, well, actually, Carter, if you look at the late 70s, like, yeah, the oil in Iran, and you had a ton of cocaine. Like, he had a lot of obstacles. So we got to factor that into his pace of possession presidency versus Reagan comes in the 80s. Everybody's happier. The Malay speech was the other thing that killed him. I mean, that was the death knell. When to have a president just stare in your TV and just be like, "You guys suck. We got to do better." People are like, "No, this can't. No, you need to go."
Yeah. People, you cannot do that. You cannot be honest with people if the honesty means that like there's something sort of wrong with you inherently,
right?
Or whatever. You know, I mean, the hostage situation was bad because it made him seem real powerless. And then the attempt to rescue them failed. So then it was like, you better not try again. Then the fact that they released the hostages on the day Reagan is being inaugurated, which was the same day as the Eagles and the Raiders played in the Super Bowl. So there was all this stuff going on. And it, like the fact that it happened at the same time, it almost made it seem like Iran was basically saying like, we waited for him. Well, they did. Like, we waited for him to be president to release him, just so, you know, it
right.
made him seem like an impotent figure, even though he really did all the work to get them released. I mean, Carter was working like 20 hours a day up until their release.
Yeah. Tough one. Jimmy Carter. Poor guy. All right. So what are your book tour stops?
On August 6th, next Tuesday, I'm in Portland. Then on the 8th, I'm in Seattle. And then the following Monday, which I think is the 12th, I'm outside. I'm in like Parma, Ohio, which is Cleveland, Ohio. And those are the last three ones. You know?
When you were on the last time, you hadn't seen Chernobyl yet?
I have seen it now.
And it was everything I told you it was going to be, wasn't it?
It was very good. I mean, I'll say this. I've never watched a dramatic series, like a non-documentary, where I learned so much stuff. Like, as it turns out, I did not know how a nuclear reactor worked.
Right.
I had no idea whatsoever. It is, I will say to somebody who's listening to this and they're like, oh man, I don't got the time for that. If you watch the first episode and the last episode, you get almost everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's helpful to watch the whole thing, but there's like a lot of exposition, particularly in the last episode in the courtroom, that really explains a lot. I mean, you'll miss like the personal relationships or whatever, but it was very good. You know,
Nephew Kyle, did you watch it?
I watched the first episode.
That was it. Nephew Kyle was one and done.
I'm not out, but I just watched.
Yeah, that's tough. It's tough to regain the momentum.
I felt one criticism of it that I thought was real interesting. Somebody said that because they used all British actors, it really sort of skewed the way it was told, because they say that depressed British people are very different than depressed Russian people. And that the way Russian people express depression is very different than the way British people do. That's kind of, that's kind of an interesting idea.
I never know what accent somebody should have in a show like that. I don't know
It's odd.
What are they going to do? Like a Russian accent?
British.
Yeah. British seems like neutral.
You know, why in fantasy? Like why do most fantasies involve people speaking vaguely British? I mean, granted they had kings and catapults and stuff, but Game of Thrones is not in England. But everyone's kind of British. Point.
I love Chernobyl. The last thing, and then we'll go, is just, are you watching Loudest Voice or no?
What is it?
Oh, it's it would be the most Klosterman-y show of the year if Chernobyl hadn't come out. It's Russell Crowe playing Roger Ailes.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I didn't know what it was titled. I saw the trailer for it. I'll probably watch that.
I would
probably watch that.
I would say it's in your wheelhouse way more than you realize it is, because it's really a history of Fox News and that how they put that channel together and the mindset behind it and how that channel evolved through the era, but also a ton of Me Too stuff going on. And it's way better than I thought.
I've been watching this show years and years.
Yeah.
And I have really enjoyed that. Like, it's kind of melodramatic. Some of the storylines are crazy, but like for people who are kind of interested in like a dystopia that's around the corner, it's very well done in that regard. There's a lot of action in terms of news. Yeah.
And we both watched that documentary that should have been one part and it ended up being two. I Love You, Now Die, which I've found has been a really interesting reflection on somebody's relationship. Whether they think the girl was guilty or not, or what should have happened to her. It can end up turning into like an argument between a couple, because some people think, yeah, put her in jail. Other people think actually she shouldn't have been convicted. And then there's the third party, which is the correct answer, which is my answer, which is guilty by insanity. I don't know what happened to guilty by insanity, but she seemed like that should have been the verdict.
Well, okay, for people who don't know what we're talking about, there's a documentary about a case that I think happened pretty recently, 2015, where a girl had a relationship with a guy. I mean, I guess they were boyfriend and girlfriend. They'd only seen each other 5 times in 2 years, but they texted constantly. And then he was suicidal, and she supposedly convinced him to commit suicide. It was the 2-part documentary, and it's like you watch the first part, and there's like, she's obviously guilty. And then you watch the second part, it's like, oh, maybe she's innocent. It was like, it really wasn't very instructive about what really happened. Also, she doesn't talk in this documentary.
Right.
And I guess it's, I can understand why. And like, this is probably kind of an arrot thing to say, but I feel like if I talked to her for 20 minutes, I'd know if she was guilty or not.
Right.
Like, I think it would be real telling to me what she's like as a person,
Yeah.
The guilty by insanity is odd, because what you're kind of arguing in a way is that being in high school makes you insane. That a high school kid is a normal high school kid is kind of insane by adult standards, and that might be true. I don't know. Oh,
I thought her behavior was way past the normal level of behavior, and they had a lot of stuff in there that, she's pretty off the rails, and their relationship was off the rails, and the poor kid who ended up killing himself, he had a lot of stuff going on, and it was just like a toxic match. And I don't know.
I have found that when I talk to people about it, I am surprised by how many women I've talked to who felt a lot of empathy for her and said like that's not so far removed from the experience of being a female in high school or whatever, the ways that the importance of your friendships and also like the idea of seeing things on television and sort of adopting it as your own narrative. Like I didn't feel that way in high school, but I've been surprised by how many people I've talked to have expressed that.
Well, she was basically convinced she was one of the characters from Glee. To me, that's like the insanity defense. We've been really helped with that information.
Well, but no, I don't think she was convinced she was a character from Glee. I think she longed to have the life that she saw on a television show.
All right. Well, same thing.
Yes. That when a person is an adult, that's weird. When they're 14, I don't know what you like. You have a better sense because you have a daughter. Maybe like did your daughter watch it? That would be interesting.
I can have her. I wish it was an hour shorter, but Yeah, that's not a bad idea. It's it's disturbing, but not like super disturbing. I really want Nephew Kyle to watch it. I'm interested.
I saw it.
You saw
I had
it?
a long talk with the girlfriend about it.
Oh,
Me.
did you disagree on whether she was guilty or not?
Yeah. We kind of met in the middle, but
yeah. See, this is the thing about this documentary is I haven't heard of a couple yet who agree completely on what they think the verdict should have been. It's a good litmus test.
Because you know what the thing is, it is a new problem.
Yeah.
Like that is not it's not as though there's some version of that happened when we were in high school. There is none. There is no version prior to this period of time where people who have only seen each other 5 times in 2 years could have that intimate of a relationship.
Right.
If they wrote a letter every day,
yeah,
people used to do when their boyfriend or was in the army or whatever, it's not like continual texting. It's just not like that, And I'm pretty mixed about it. Like in some ways, I feel that just having this happen to her is almost enough of a penalty.
I mean, she was in jail for what, like a year and a half as this thing was going along, and it seemed like, and then they let her out. They did the time served thing, and then the family rightfully was like, "What the fuck?" And then she ended up going back in. But
yeah, I mean, she had no teenage experience, really. I mean, it's like the memory of her adolescence is going to be completely negative. I guess that almost seems like enough to me, but
yeah. Well, wasn't a feel good documentary. But what is feel good is Chuck Klosterman's book tour. Still going right now. Raised in Captivity. Chuck, a pleasure as always. Look forward to doing this again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to Chuck. Thanks to ZipRecruiter. Don't forget to go to ZipRecruiter.com/BS. That's the last podcast on this feed for this week. Rewatchables with the Town coming on Friday on the Rewatchables feed. And shout out to Nephew Kyle. Until the next one.